शरणागति शरणागति शरणागति.
Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. So everything has an origin and everything has an end. But when I asked Bhagavan what the most important verse in the Bhagavad Gita said, he said they're all important. But they kept pushing him, and he said, okay, chapter 10, verse 20, Aham Atma Gura Kesha Sarva Bhuta Shayastitaha Aham Adishtya Madhyam Cha Utanam Anta Evacha. So I am the beginning, O Gura Kesha. I am the self of all. I am the beginning, I am the middle, I am the end of all. So, the beginning, the middle, and the end, that's the Supreme Self. That's the origin of everything. And that's what was prayed to by Vishnu and Brahma. Okay. We got our Lord of Mercy and Grace, Arunachala, in the beginning of the creation of this world. So it's where it all begins and where it all resolves. I thought there was a very interesting conversation. Dr. Saeed asked Bhagavan, you are an Advaitin, and you singled out this mountain and praised it as God. How can you do that? You are an Advaitin, everything is one. And Bhagavan had a beautiful answer. He should have been an attorney like his father. He said, the hymns and praise, the object of praise, and the one who praised is all the self. And that's Arunachala. And that's Bhagavan also. So, this is my little thesis, and to begin with, which you all know, I'm just going over it. You see that Arunachala is Jnana-Agni, the fire of knowledge, in the form of a hill. It is Lord Shiva himself. Bhagavan has said that just as we individuals identify ourselves with our bodies, the Supreme Self identifies itself with this Arunachala mountain. And down through the ages, those rich in jnana tapas were drawn to this hill for the fulfillment of the ultimate aim of self-realization. And in order to enlighten the world to its spiritual power and teachings, Arunachala Shiva, in his mercy, absorbed the individuality of a 16-year-old boy in Madurai and guided him to his slopes on September 1st, 1896. And there is the closest thing we have to the 16-year-old boy. Previously, Arunachala was just a regional place of pilgrimage. The Kartikeya Deepam was just a regional celebration of the history of the mountain. But now, at this period of time when globalization is predominant and everyone knows everything about everywhere, it's the perfect time for Bhagavan to come and transmit, not only the teachings but the power of the mountain to all of us. So when there he reigned as the king of the yogis on the slopes, showering his light and love on all beings, until April 14th, 1950, when he merged back into the source from whence he came, Arunachala Shiva. So it would probably be better if we just sit and meditate. We'll gain more from that meditation than me sitting here speaking. And there's nothing special I know that you already don't know or have not heard. And they asked Bhagavan, what are the restrictions or the rules for a sadhaka? You can read it in the book Spiritual Instruction. And Bhagavan gave very few rules or restrictions. He said, one, moderation in food, 2, moderation in sleep, and 3, which is my point I'm trying to bring out now, moderation in speech. So that's difficult for me to do, and I prefer to do that. And because in Arunachala Ashram, where I live, and a few others live, the resident devotees consider themselves to be the servants of the Master's children. And everyone here is the Master's children. I lived in a friend's house who was well-to-do in Delhi cantonment. He had a big house and maybe 6 servants in the 1980s. I was working on a project. He was helping me. And when I was there, I observed the servants there, how they just served the Master, their guests, their children, and kept a distance. And their only purpose was to make those people comfortable and not be in the way or even be seen. So I took that as a lesson that is what a real devotee living in Bhagavan's ashram and anywhere can really follow to get fulfillment and happiness in life. When I was young, I used to have in my room a saying on the wall that I took from the Imitation of Christ. You may have heard of that book. It was a book, one of 2 books that Swami Vivekananda had with him when he traveled around India after Ramakrishna Paramahansa passed away. And the Bhagavad Gita, and the other book was The Imitation of Christ. And I kept it on my wall because I found one little statement in there that helped me a lot. It said, "Study, my son, to do the will of another rather than your own. Seek always the lowest place and be subject to everyone. And study and pray always that the will of God may be totally fulfilled in you." By the will of God being fulfilled in you, that means that you surrender completely to God. And only God alone exists. So now I do that, I try to my ability and best to do that in the ashram. And everyone can do that, have that same attitude as a servant, even in the family life or the workplace, and get fulfillment and satisfaction and feel at ease and free, because you're not responsible, you're just serving the Master. Who is the Master in the case of a family person? I don't want to say that for Sanukya, but there he is. Not only him, your children. And who's the Master for that person there? There she is. I mean, these are who we serve everyone as if they are God or they're God's children. And in that way, our ego will slowly wears down. As it wears down, we have more and more peace, more and more freedom. We feel more and more happiness. By serving everyone, making them happy, now they say, well, how can I be humble and still progress in my ambition to rise in my profession to the highest of my potential? How can I do that? So what is the purpose of life? Is it to rise to the highest position in your profession, in your company, and whatever you want to? No, that's not the real meaning and purpose of life. The real meaning, purpose in life is to know who you are, to know what you are, to experience the true nature of yourself. That only can give you the highest fulfillment, or the perfect fulfillment. Otherwise, we'll be struggling here and struggling there, trying to get better grades, or the grades are very important for these children, of course. But we should know that that's not the real meaning and purpose of life. That's our occupation, and we should do it to the best of our ability. And one point in this, but we should do it with detachment. We all have a destiny. We all have prarabdha karma. And what's going to happen is going to happen. When we come out of the womb, the book of our life comes with us. It's already written. This is what Bhagavan says. So Devaraj Madalya said, okay, I'm picking up this fan, I'm putting it down here. Now I understand that the main aspects of my life, my birth, my getting married, my death are all predestined. But what about me picking up this fan, moving it and putting it here? Is that predestined? Bhagavan said, certainly that's predestined. Everything outwardly happening in your life is predestined. So naturally, the lawyer that Devaraj Madhya was countered and said, well, if that's the case, what freedom do we have? We have no freedom if everything's predestined. Bhagavan said, you have one freedom. That freedom is to turn within and detach yourself from it and realize your true nature. That's the freedom you have. What's going to happen outwardly with your body, with the actions, with your profession, with all your life aspects, that's all predestined. It's hard to understand. A person who is in the state or abiding in the source or abiding in the self sees it happening. He knows that that's how it happens. But we project our little selves, our egos, and say, no, that's not going to, I don't see how this works. I have to fight hard. I have to have ambition, desire. Where ultimately realize that the desireless state is the happiest state. To desire nothing is to be without thought, is to be free without thought. So we all do Kunja Swami, we do other old devotees of Bhagavan. There is Ramaswami Pillai, there is N.N. Rajan, there is Professor T.N. Krishnamurti, there is Swami Vishwanathan. I met all these old devotees when I used to go there in the 70s and the 80s. And you can say Kanakamal was one of the last ones who died, and also 2010 on Bhagavan's Jayanthi day, standing in front of Bhagavan's Samadhi. So she was one of the last ones who had moved there, lived with Bhagavan for the purpose of fulfilling their life and experiencing the fulfillment of the teachings of Bhagavan. So, but Kunja Swami, all these devotees I had met, if you went to ask them any questions, they would say, you're asking me the question. And I said, yes. And they said, why are you asking me? Because Bhagavan is here now. You just go to the Samadhi hall. Even in the olden days, when Bhagavan was sitting there, we didn't have to orally ask questions, although many were asked. But many of the sincere devotees, they just sat there in their mind. And the question may be answered. You read it in talks to some reply to someone, but Bhagavan may be answering the question to another person sitting by, although that answer is given to a person who answers the question. It happened like that, and most people, they would sit and Bhagavan would answer their question, either by dissolving that question into nothing and giving them the peace of the fruit of the answer of that question, or he would answer that question in some way indirectly. So these old devotees, although many of them were very enlightened souls, they would never take on the position of a guru. They would think themselves to be guru. Bhagavan was so present to them that where were they? They believed they didn't exist, only Bhagavan exists. So how could they be a guru? Although they guided just by their life many of the people assumed. I know, I've met many people over the years. They have read Bhagavan teaching. They're so direct. Really, for a Westerner, that's what first attracted me to Ramana Maharshi and his life and teachings. I read the teaching. This is so simple and so direct. So they would read those and they would practice it and they would have some experience. And they say, okay, we only want self-inquiry. Everything else is a distraction from that. And only self-inquiry will take us to the goal. And this is true. But how many people are ready to sit and focus their mind on the mind or on the source of the mind and do that solely throughout the day and night? Very few. It's really not how long you sit for meditation. It's with what intensity you do it for the short periods that you do it. That's the most important thing, the intensity, or the one-pointedness. It's not the length of time. So, Kunja Swami used to tell me he used to sleep in the old hall with Bhagavan, but Bhagavan was always sitting up and reclining on the sofa. So, they didn't feel like lying down and going to sleep until Bhagavan had slept. But how to tell if Bhagavan had slept? He was just sitting there. So they felt uncomfortable, so they would meditate, and now and then open their eyes and have a look. But Kunja Swami said, so when they saw his head go back a little bit, boom, they lie down. But they had to wait till that. So, but in those days, early days, anybody used to come into the old hall and sleep right there on the floor with Bhagavan. That's the uniqueness of Ramana Maharshi, his openness. He never restricted people from seeing him, even on his last day. He wouldn't stop the queue from coming by just to have darshan of him. He never, had his voice recorded, but he let them take many photographs. And also, Kunja Swami had said about that to do the parayana, to do the japa, to do the dhyana, and also the self-inquiry, and always have self-inquiry as your goal. All those methods are for the purpose of calming the mind. Also doing pranayama too, just watching the breath. One finds also if one meditates deeply, the breath becomes very still automatically. And the breath and mind, they say, the breath is a horse, the mind is a rider. If the horse stops, the mind stops. And if the mind stops, the horse stops. The breath will stop also. And then one goes deeper and deeper. But Bhagavan also, what I have read, and he told us before, that Bhagavan told him to keep self-inquiry as the goal. Because but all these other methods help to control the mind, to make it one-pointed. So, I got all my pages mixed up here. But I wanted to say something about the Bhagavan's Jayanti. So, I know Sunita sends out the Jayanti poems of Bhagavan every year, right? The 2 verses he wrote. And on the first Jayanti program in 1912, it was the Vasudev Shastri was the one who instigated it and insisted that they cook food and eat it in the ashram. So this is in Virupaksha. They had no utensils, or they had no food, so they had to go beg the food and get some utensils from somebody and cook it. And Bhagavan was very insistent that no, that should not be done. We're not cooking food in the ashram. We go out to beg our food. But then the Vasudev Shastri said, he said, what is it to you? It's for us. So why should you object? And they celebrated the birthday, the first year. Recalling its occasion, Bhagavan said, while I was in Virupaksha cave on my birthday, 1912, those around me insisted on cooking food and eating it there as a celebration of the occasion. I tried to dissuade them, but they rebelled, saying, what harm does it do to Bhagavan if we sit here and eat food? Therefore, I left it at that. They immediately purchased some vessels and created the birthday that year for the first time. But what began as a small function has resulted in all this paraphernalia and pomp. Now, if you've seen recently the Jayanti program going on now at Ramana, I'm sure they're quite mild compared to the ones on the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Everything must take its own course and will not stop at our request. I argued with them at great length, but they did not listen. When the cooking and eating were over, Ishwara Swami, who was with me at those days, said, Swami, today being our birthday, please compose 2 verses, and I too will compose 2. So that was something Ishwara Swami used to do often with Bhagavan. He said, you compose and I compose. So Bhagavan got his chance to let him have it. So in the first verse he said, you who intend to celebrate the birthday first ascertain as to from where you were born. The day that we attain a place in that everlasting life which is beyond the birth and death is our real birthday. And two, at least on the birthday, we ought to lament that we got this body and fell into this world. Instead, we celebrate the event with a feast. Something's wrong with us, definitely. To rejoice over this is like decorating a corpse. Wisdom consists in realizing the self and in getting absorbed in the self. Now, there was a rejoinder written about those two verses by Major Chadwick. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it. So Major Chadwick, who came to Bhagavan in 1935 and passed away in 1982, you'll see his samadhi there, Ramana ashram next to Cohen, and H.C. Khanna, and Lucy Cornelissen. It's in the ashram there. So Major Chadwick also had his chance to give his rebuttal. And he wrote, "You tell me not to celebrate the day when I was born. Seeing it led me to thy feet, why therefore should I mourn? Births in the past were filled with woe, but this one's freed from pain. For having thee, I surely know that freedom I'll attain." So that's the great enjoiner which we all support.
My name is Darlene DeLisi Caramanos, and I have known Dennis for 46 years. Dennis often reminded me of Bhagavan's teachings, either directly or indirectly. One example happened a few years ago. We were walking from the house to the barn, and I was very worried about my oldest son. My husband and I were at our wits' end, and I was telling Dennis about it. I told Dennis that I presented both of my children to Arunachalam, even though I felt that they were both gifts from Arunachalam. And how could my son be on such a wrong path now, such a dangerous direction that his life was taking? Anyway, I tried to lay a guilt trip on Dennis, saying that he was his godfather, and can't you do something, talk to him? But Dennis wasn't falling for that at all. He just shrugged his shoulders and said, give him back to Arunachalam. We both ended up laughing and kept walking, and I was reminded of Bhagavan's verse in the Marital Garlands, which says, "My maintenance is thy burden, O Arunachalam."
Namaskar. My name is Krishnan and I live in Ottawa, Canada. I have been very fortunate to have had the association with Sadhu Dennis for over 31 years. I strongly feel it was Bhagavan's grace that brought me from India all the way to Dalhousie University, Halifax in 1988. Within a week of arriving in Halifax, the Divine Force took me to Nova Scotia Ashram to attend the Day of Advent. Dennis gave me a copy of the typewritten English transliteration of Aksharamanamala, which was like a treasure for me. From that time onwards, Dennis has been my friend, philosopher, and guide. Every time I was on a crossroad to make a difficult decision, I wrote to Dennis and the right answer came to me in some form. I feel his presence all the time. Where can he go?
Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. Namaskar everyone. This is Anil here from Ottawa. Just like all of you, we are here missing Dennis very much. And we are thinking of him and remember him constantly. For all of us to have such a guide, such a mentor, and such a friend is something that we should treasure. How fortunate we are that we could meet someone like Dennis, who has guided us to the feet of Sri Ramana and Arunachala. It's amazing, isn't it? How many times I've thought that wherever we go in the world, we could never meet someone so sincere and dedicated as Dennis. And I've found this to be true. Wherever we go, he is a shining ideal for all of us, isn't it? So, how fortunate we are sitting here in North America that we get to see Bhagavan's devotee in front of us and guiding us and giving us all such friendship and affection. So, many years ago, when I was going to school in Halifax, Nova Scotia, near the ashram, we used to sit in the front window of the ashram with Dennis, and we used to look outside in the field near the ashram, and there used to be this gopher that used to be coming and going back and forth. And Dennis, as you know, has great affection for all animals and a great friendship with wildlife. So he was explaining to me at that time how the gopher comes and goes to his burrow there. And he wrote to me a letter at that time. I'll just read you one paragraph here. It says, "There is a groundhog," this is Dennis writing, "there is a groundhog living right next to the house here. He sometimes comes to the feeder and munches on the grains that the birds leave behind. I notice that it never travels too far away from its hole, so that in times of fear, it can always make a quick dash into his hole for safety. And then, often, I will see him calmly lay by the side of his hole, soaking in the early morning rising sun. He feels secure and at peace near his hole. Well, the reason I am telling you all this is that because I just sat down again after talking to you. You have Siddhi, no doubt. I am just like that groundhog. This place is my hole, which I never want to leave or stray far from. I can bask in the sun of peace here, just like my friend, lying next to his hole early in the morning. I know the ideal is to be so established that no place or no one can shake you out of that inner sanctuary. But I am just a boy, and I feel very happy in the company of my mother, this ashrama." So you can see here how much love Dennis has for the ashram. And I have no doubt, wherever he is, he'll continue to guide the ashram, and he'll continue to guide us all. All we have to do is sit quietly and go inwards. Thank you, Dennis. How can we ever thank you? Namaskaram.
Over the last few years, I've been very fortunate to have the company of Dennis for extended periods of time in the New York and Nova Scotia ashrams, as well as during many road trips, with him sharing many memorable anecdotes about Bhagavan and his devotees, childhood memories of his own, pointers for sadhana, and so on, all with a smile on his face. In fact, the last time I was with him was on one such road trip from New York to New Hampshire. We reached there for the night, and the next morning, Dennis was to leave to go further up north to Nova Scotia Ashram while I stayed back in New Hampshire. Before leaving, we decided to do the morning program just like in the ashram. So the way the chant was played, and we all settled down with me sitting right next to Dennis in a very small couch. And as the chant started playing, I found myself sliding into an effortless and deep silence that lasted for the entire period of meditation undisturbed. I opened my eyes gently, and it immediately occurred to me that this silence was a direct effect of sitting right next to Dennis for the first time during meditation. More than all the wise words about spirituality that one can say, it is this transmission of silence that is the most precious. And as Dennis was getting into the car soon after to leave us to Nova Scotia, I was just thinking to myself, what a rare being I've been fortunate to know, who's carrying such a silence with him effortlessly that I was able to tap into that morning. After that, now that he has walked away silently and suddenly, as only he could have, I am only filled with even greater respect for his spirit of renunciation and surrender to Bhagavan to be able to walk away from all that is known into the freedom of the unknown.
I am fully convinced that it's Bhagavan who sent Dennis Hartel into my life. I met Dennis for the first time in 2005 when Swami invited him to Bhagavan's Jayanthi celebration in California. We exchanged a few words, and as we parted, he said, "The only thing that keeps me going is meeting young people like you who aspire sincerely for the higher life." For 15 years since that first meeting, I have benefited so much from Dennis's friendship, guidance, and above all, his silent presence. I was inspired to memorize Aksharamanamale after listening to him chant the 108 verses with such deep devotion. He encouraged me to visit Sri Ramanashramam in Tiruvannamalai and requested me to send him a detailed report of my visit. I did that in August 2005. Over the years, Dennis has been a great guide, gently bringing me back to Bhagavan's path of self-inquiry every time I wandered away. As an example, I once shared with him a method I learnt at a Vedanta class to overcome attachment. The method was to strip an object into its basic elements and thus overcome attraction to the object itself. I thought it was a cool tool to keep the mind in check. Dennis listened to me patiently and then gently but very firmly said, "Bhagavan has taught us to ask, who is it that is getting attracted? That is all. How can it be easier than that? And you, of all people, should know better." I will never forget his voice when he said that. Stern by Dennis's standards, and to this day it serves as a reminder to never swerve from Bhagavan's direct path of self-inquiry. He always said intensity of practice was the main requirement for success. I treasure his Maharshi newsletters that have nourished my soul throughout. I'm also very grateful to Dennis for never letting me lean on him. While he encouraged and inspired me in numerous ways, he always cautioned me to repose my faith in Bhagavan and in no one else, including himself. "Only Bhagavan looks after us," he would often say. Dennis led his life consumed by Bhagavan and his teachings. He never asked for anything, and like our rishis of yore, effectively led the life of a parivrajaka even when amidst all of us. His purity, gentleness, tranquility, and complete surrender are permanently etched in my inner mind. Knowing him has been one of the greatest blessings of my life.
From that time to now, are you aware of how you have changed, you as a devotee?
Well, I changed.
Are you aware of it? Because it's very subtle, right? Change.
Change is less distraction, less thoughts, less me. You find that me is peeling away, and you realize that you're nothing. That's what you find more. That's the only thing you can find, that you're nothing. That's the only thing to find out.
Just walk away.
You're not something more, you're just nothing. You don't become something more. You become nothing. And nothing, matters much. It was taken on December 2nd, Tuesday, 1947. And it's the same photograph that they put on the couch where he's sitting right now in the old hall where he lived for over 20 years. It was accessible 24 hours a day.
प्राप्यते फलं कर्म किं परं कर्म तज्जडं कृतिमहो दधौ पतनकारणं फलमशाश्वतं गतिनिरोधकम् ईश्वरार्पितं नेच्छया कृतं चित्तशोधकं मुक्तिसाधकं कायवाङ्मनः कार्यमुत्तमं पूजनं जपश्चिन्तनं क्रमात् स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईशदर्शनं स्वात्मरूपतः आत्मसंस्थितिः स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्भयादात्मनिष्ठता ज्ञानवर्जिता ज्ञानहीनचित् ज्ञानमस्ति किं ज्ञातुमन्तरं किं स्वरूपमित्यात्मदर्शने अव्यया भवा पूर्णचित्सुखम् मुक्त्यतीतं परं सुखं विन्दतीह जीवस्तु दैविकः अहमपेतकं निजविभानकं महदिदं तपो रमणवागियम्